going to be in Exodus 3, so if you want to go ahead and open up to that. These are the two chapters that are relatively straightforward. I think they also provide a lot of opportunity for discussion, and so hopefully we'll have that. These two chapters are exclusively about whenever Moses argues with God about why he should never go back to Egypt, which I think is ironic for a bunch of different reasons. But I think they also provide a good introspection into Moses as a character. I think they describe a good way in which we sometimes kind of make excuses, and so we can kind of look at it those ways. And that's really the struggle, I think, when you look at this, is which way to talk about this, how do we discuss it? Because the facts are the facts, but how do we discuss it? So that's going to kind of be the goal for us this morning. Before we get started, though, I'll ask Curtis to lead us in a word of prayer. Amen. Thank you. As you'll notice, we are in Exodus chapter 3. You may be thinking at this point, we're not moving very quickly through Exodus. It's a big book. We've got a lot to go through. You're exactly right, but the last several sections will take massive chunks of text at a time. So when we get into the latter half of Exodus, we'll talk about 3 or 4 chapters at a time, because most of those are thematically around a certain type of idea, and so we'll kind of move quicker then. This is very much still the groundwork, so we can talk about introduction. We can do chapters 1 and 2, today chapters 3 and 4. Let's back up a little bit, though, and go back to last week. What happens in Exodus chapter 1? So both of these are kind of important to understanding the story of Exodus. What happens in Exodus chapter 1? Curtis, go ahead.
Pharaoh gives command to kill all the boy babies.
Yeah, Pharaoh commands to kill all the boy babies. Why does he do that? Because yeah, he wants to diminish the population of the Hebrews. And when you think about that, there's a lot of correlations between Exodus 1 and what happens in Matthew 1 with Herod the Great. They're very, very similar in a lot of ways. They're both designed to preserve power. But at the same time, Bethlehem is a much smaller scale than when you look at something like Exodus. Exodus chapter 1, you're talking about thousands of children, which regardless of where you're at, both of them are horrendous. But one is a much bigger scale than the other. And so it's a hard chapter to read, I think, for a lot of reasons. Joe? Right. Yeah, Herod's is more born out of paranoia than anything else, whereas Pharaoh seems like it's kind of a mass kind of official type of thing that they're going to do, where we're going to do this in order to prevent something like that from happening. We talked about that last week. Is that a reasonable paranoia for Pharaoh? I think it is. The Hyksos rebellion had just happened 100 or so years before that. So this isn't something that's unseen in their recent history, and so it's important to kind of preempt a lot of that before it's happening. Go ahead.
We see, when Joseph came and then the rest of his family came, they were well established in Egypt, almost maybe productive members of that society, but they transitioned to slavery.
Yeah, and that transition is just kind of passingly mentioned in Exodus chapter 1, but when you think about this, the time it takes to go from one to the other, I don't think you can really pass that by. For instance, like you talked about with Joseph, how influential he was at the end of Genesis, to now the transition, Exodus 1, now they're slaves. This isn't something that happens in 1, probably even 2 generations. This is something that takes a few hundred years to happen. And so,
yeah, talks about those that came to power did not know.
Right.
The previous.
Yeah, and once again, it's not that they didn't recognize him. It's not that they didn't know who he was. It's that they didn't appreciate him and respect him for what he contributed to them. So you're exactly right. Exodus 1, in my opinion, can kind of be summed up to how bad is the slavery in Egypt. I mean, when you think about what Moses talks about in chapter 1, it's purely around how bad the slavery is. Why is that an important point to kind of lead off Exodus with? If you're writing Exodus for the purposes of what Moses wrote it for, why are you leading off with the slavery in Egypt? Curtis, go ahead. It does. I mean, it sets the stage for everything that's going to happen. It explains why they even leave to begin with. I think it also reminds them of just how bad it was so that it's not something they go back to. When you look at Numbers and you look at Deuteronomy, there's always this, for whatever reason, this temptation to go back to Egypt. They need to be reminded how bad it was. You see the same thing happening in the New Testament. Ephesians talks about don't forget what you came from. Remember what you used to be. You used to be alienated. Don't go back to that life. And I think there's a very real purpose for that. What is Exodus 2 about? Yeah. The birth of Moses. Right, or as I put it so lovingly with 2 punctuation marks, who's going to help them out of this situation? If slavery is as bad, obviously, as Exodus chapter 1 makes it sound, the question then is who's going to be the deliverer? What kind of deliverer was Moses in Exodus chapter 2? Because this, I think, bleeds very well into chapter 3. I think chapter 2 explains exactly why Moses is so hesitant in chapters 3 and 4. What kind of deliverer was Moses, though, in chapter 2? He wasn't reluctant in chapter 2, although I think I can see why you say that. He probably really enjoyed his life in Egypt. Go ahead.
And this might be wrong, but I think he kind of wanted to do something, but he didn't really have God's backing or power to do anything.
Yeah, and that's difficult to say because it's not that he acted in a sinful way. I'm not saying that he sinned necessarily in chapter 2. But you're right, his deliverance there wasn't exactly the way that it should have been. If you think about kind of the process by which Moses tried to deliver them, Exodus chapter 2, he decides that he's going to go out and visit these people. That's around when he's 40 years old. He sees the Israelites, which he identifies as his Hebrew brethren. That's something that Acts chapter 7 expounds a little bit more. He recognizes them as being his brethren, recognizes that they're being persecuted. He kills the Egyptian, buries him in the sand, and assumes what? What does he assume according to Acts chapter 7? We talked about how Moses has a little bit of a savior complex. Go ahead.
Number one, he assumed he got away with it without even
That's true, too.
He assumed that Israel or the Hebrews would be pleased with what he had done.
Yeah, I think both of those are true. I guess he assumed that nobody would recognize that Bill didn't come back from his day shift. I mean, I think that's going to be noticeable pretty quick. Maybe he thought they wouldn't identify it with him. Maybe that was the connection he was hoping to avoid. Which is ironic considering he does it in front of people he's also hoping to incite a rebellion with. So you can't be popular among some people and then also be anonymous with others. And that seems to be kind of where he's around. John, go ahead.
When you bring up Jesus, Moses thought he was going to be the savior of his people.
Right.
And he was rejected by the people.
Right.
And just like Jesus is rejected today.
Yeah, and that's true too. I mean, that's the point that Stephen's making in Acts chapter 7 is you guys are looking for a savior, looking for a deliverer, but everybody that God has sent, you've rejected in some way. Whether it's the prophets that he sent, whether it's Moses you've rejected, and guess who else you've rejected, he says? You've also rejected Jesus. So that's kind of the thread that he's putting forth there. But in the middle of that, he makes mention of the fact that Moses assumed that everybody would see this as the deliverance. That deliverance wasn't obviously what God had in mind, and so he kind of retreats. He goes off into Midian. He's there for about 40 years. You can see that at the end of Exodus chapter 2. There's this little note, though, at the end of this chapter in verse 23, Exodus chapter 2. It says, "Now it came about in the course of those many days that the king of Egypt died." That's exactly what happens in Matthew when Herod dies. You can see that kind of note there. "The sons of Israel sighed because of the bondage. They cried out, and their cry for help because of their bondage rose up to God. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the sons of Israel, and God took notice of them." What does it say that God did in those 2 verses, those 3 verses, rather? Because this is very intentional. You don't oftentimes see repetition just for no reason. There's obviously a purpose for it. What does it say that God did there? He heard their groaning. What else did he do? He looked upon them, yeah. That was the last one, but yes, he took notice of them. He remembered his covenant, exactly. He also did one thing. What else did he do? There's 4 of them. He acknowledged them. There's all 4 of those different things that are placed back to back to back to back to back. Why is there so much emphasis on what God does? Obviously, Moses is writing this, so keep that in mind. Yeah. Yeah, he was never too far away from them. I think you see that theme in Hebrews, ironically. When you look at the book of Hebrews, part of the things that keeps recurring, I think it happens at least twice, possibly 3 times in the book of Hebrews, is God's able to see your sufferings. He's able to see your persecution. He sees you. He's with you. But it also points out to the fact, especially there in verse 24, remembers his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is something that he had talked about beforehand. So everything that's about to unravel is something that was kind of talked about, was known about beforehand. None of this kind of happened by Moses' hand. It all happened by God's hand, obviously. Somebody have any thoughts or comments before we move into chapter 3? Yeah, Ken?
We don't have a lot of detail, a little in Hebrews 2 and a little in Exodus 2, a little in Hebrews 11. But Moses was raised as a prince of Egypt.
Right.
And had all of the power and all the things that went along with that. We don't have a lot of detail about that, but apparently at some point had to make that choice, whether involuntarily after he killed the Egyptian.
Yeah, I think that choice was made for him. I think if he's aware of his Hebrew lineage, and especially if Pharaoh's daughter is aware of his Hebrew lineage, because that's why they called him Moses, I fished him out of the water. There's no question where he came from. The idea that this former Hebrew is now, or this by-blood Hebrew is now killing an Egyptian at 40 years old, that's not an accident. That's inciting a rebellion. There's some intent behind that. So Pharaoh's not going to have any issue putting his own son to death. He's put his children to death for much less than that. So I think Moses was right to run. And as we talked about at the end of last week, he runs all the way to Midian, which is hundreds of miles away. So this isn't a small distance. But that kind of bleeds into what we're talking about here in Exodus chapter 3. By the time Exodus 3 opens up, what state is Moses in? I'm not talking about Nebraska. What state is he in, though? Might as well be Nebraska, though. Where do we find him in Exodus 3? Okay, you say he's content with being a shepherd. I won't ask you to build more upon that, but I think that's a curious phrase. He does seem to be very happy. Of course, by the time you find him in Exodus 3, he's been doing it for 40 years. So he's been as much a shepherd as he has been in the house of Pharaoh. So I think you probably are content at that point. Yeah.
Seems to be in denial. He's trying to avoid that obvious, but it does seem to gnaw at him a little bit.
Yeah, that's what I come to too. When Moses sees God in the burning bush, which is what we're going to talk about here in just a second, it seems as if he's not anticipating it, but he's kind of like, okay, I've been through this before, I understand this. It's almost as if he had thought about the idea several times of going back to Egypt and doing exactly what he wanted to do and started in the beginning, but he's just kind of unsure about the failure and success rate of it all. And so that's kind of, to your point, I think he's very content with where he's at, but it does seem like there's something that's left undone. Go ahead.
It seems like he's in a state of exile.
Yeah. He's certainly not amongst people that he knows. I mean, when you talk about who Jethro is and what the priests and Midians and the shepherds, there's a whole lot of question marks surrounding that nature of those people, especially when you consider that Jethro later is a priest in Midian. What's all that all about? Regardless of his status, he's not with his own people, and that does seem to be kind of a longing for him. Karen? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It says in Exodus, I think it says in Exodus 2 that he was with them until he was weaned, which is a vague term on purpose. It's anywhere between ages 2 to 10. So it would have been long enough for him to be familiar with obviously Hebrew accounts, but short enough that the bulk of his life would have been spent in Egyptian culture. And so he kind of has that dual knowledge of where he came from, but also eventually where he's going, or what he was too. So I think both of those are there. When you look at Moses in Exodus chapter 3, I think there's quite a picture of him. He's certainly content. I think there's things that are left undone. He's isolated. He feels like there's things that are happening that he's not a part of. Exodus chapter 3 paints a very simple picture of him. He was pasturing the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. He led the flock to the west side of the wilderness, came to Horeb, which is the mountain of God. There's some argument about whether Horeb is the same as Mount Sinai. I think they're the same, but if you think they're different, there's nothing wrong with that. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush, and he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, and yet the bush was not consumed. This is why in verse 3, Moses says, I must turn now aside and see this marvelous sight. why this bush is not burned up. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said to him, Moses, and he said, Here I am. And then he said, Do not come near here. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. He said, Also, I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Then Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. This whole interaction with Moses and God, this initial correspondence, I think is fascinating. How does God interact with Moses, and how does Moses interact with God? What does God tell Moses to do? Because he presents himself. He says, Moses, and if a bush is talking to me, I'm turning around. I don't know if here I am is the first thing I'm saying, but it's probably the second or third. What does God tell Moses to do? Take your sandals off, for the place where you're standing is holy ground. That's exactly right. What else does he tell him to do? Don't come near here, yeah. Or at least listen to me, but don't approach with any kind of irreverence, yeah. What else does he tell Moses? Tells him who he is, exactly. He says specifically there in verse 6, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Moses' response at the end of verse 6 is interesting. What does he do at the end of verse 6? He hides his face, which is exactly, if you remember in Exodus 19, I think it is, whenever Moses comes down from the mountain the second time, or maybe it's the first time, his face is aglow with the kind of the glowing of God, and the people there hide their face. That's a reference that Paul makes in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. They hide their face because they can't bear to be within the presence of God. I don't know if that's why Moses is hiding his face. Why is Moses doing that here? Because Moses is eventually going to be the person that sees God face to face, at least as much as a mortal can. Why is he hiding his face here? He's afraid, but what does he mean when he says that he's afraid? He obviously wasn't afraid 40 years earlier to kill a man and try to lead an entire nation out. Why is he afraid now? He's what?
He was afraid to look at God.
Yeah, he's afraid to look at God. You can also, I think, paint in his reverence. I think both of those can kind of be built into that. This is not an unpopular or an uncommon response. When you look at Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah accords himself the exact same way. God calls out to him and he says, Woe to me, for I'm a man of unclean lips. So there's a sense in which this is built in with reverence, that he's hesitant to look at God, and that he kind of is worried about this whole interaction, doesn't exactly know what he's looking at. What's also fascinating, I think, about this section is that there are built-in concepts here that I think paint pictures of who Moses would be later. For instance, when you look at this phrase, when he says, Take off your sandals, that exact phrase is mentioned of Joshua. If you look in Joshua chapter 5, verses 13 through 15, the commander of the armies of the Lord comes to talk to Joshua, and the first thing he tells Joshua is, Take off your sandals, for the land that you're standing is holy ground. That paints Moses and Joshua as kind of a continuation of each other. Joshua is a continuation of who Moses is. But you also have this mentioned here, I've heard their cry, which is exactly what Moses said in Exodus chapter 2 and verse 11. And I don't think any of these things are by accident. You have the continuation there with Joshua, but you also have this continuation with Moses and God there in Exodus chapter 2 and verse 11. When it says that he reacts and he kills the Egyptian, he does so because he hears the groanings and the murmurings of these people, and he responds appropriately. And so in a lot of ways, this interaction with God, with Moses, when he comes to him and he says, This is what I want you to do, this is what Moses wanted to do to begin with. God is just asking Moses in Exodus chapters 3 and 4 to pick up and do what he had already was doing in chapter 2. And I think that's where that hesitancy comes in. Are there any thoughts or comments on that? Yeah, Joe?
I think it's also notable that in verse 6, he said, I am the God. He didn't say I was the God.
Right. Right.
Which indicates they're still living.
It indicates those men are still living. That's exactly right. And that's exactly what Jesus says. If you look, I think it's in Matthew 22 or something like that, where he says, when he's talking to the Pharisees about the resurrection, the Sadducees about the resurrection, he says, what does God say? He says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He says, God is not the God of the dead, but he's the God of the living. So you're right. I do think that paints those men as still being alive. There is some sense of resurrection, life after death. But also paints him, once again, as a continuation of those people. I was with them, and I'm also going to be with you. And I think that's why that's reinforced there. When God tells Moses eventually, as he's about to, I want you to go back to Egypt, what is Moses' response? And this is all of chapters 3 and 4. But what is Moses' initial response? Is he just leaping for joy at this concept?
He's basically asking God, who am I to do this?
Yeah, that's how he leads off with. And then he comes up with even more elaborate excuses. Let me ask you this question. Why does Moses not want to go back to Egypt? Because that's why I brought up the whole I heard your cry concept, is Moses and God are operating, their sense of salvation is operating from a very similar place. It's sympathy towards the people. It's I want to help my people. Moses wanted to do this 40 years ago. Probably was willing to be this type of leader, but now he doesn't want to. Why does he not want to go back to Egypt? He might still be listed as a fugitive, although the Pharaoh that sought him is dead. That's made plain there in Exodus 2 and 3.
I think the rejection he got, he was there at 40, he remembers quite well, he would expect the same thing, because he asked the question, who will I tell them will send me? You know, because who am I?
Yeah. Moses is very, and I think everybody that works for the government will appreciate this, Moses is very process-driven. He's very much like, if I do this, what's going to happen? And to God's credit, he gives them a blow-by-blow account of everything that's about to happen. But I do think you're right, and that's a little of what Nathan said. If I go back, then what's going to happen? If I talk to these people, who's going to listen to me? I saw another hand over here. Maybe I didn't. Oh, he stole yours? Okay, that happens sometimes. Go ahead.
More to that point, too, as a prince of Egypt, the Jews didn't really care what he, based on his previous interactions. He said, you killed this guy, was going to stop you from killing me next.
Yeah, I think the Israelites...
But just in terms of authority, to build off what Curtis said, his authority didn't mean anything to them.
Right.
Whereas, again, God telling him who he is.
Yeah, and that's another concern of Moses is, I mean, the Egyptians, he has enough issues to deal with them. Maybe they're still hunting me. Maybe I still have a wanted poster up somewhere with my name on it. I don't really know. But the other half of that equation is I still have to have these people follow me. And as you mentioned, 40 years ago when he killed the Egyptian, the Jews didn't exactly respond with open arms to his supposed insurrection. So what's the difference between now and then? They're probably in even worse slavery, worse bondage. So what's going to change in this equation that now they'll actually follow me? And that's, I think both of those concerns are part of his issues. What's the real issue with Moses, though? I think this goes a little bit back to what Sammy talked about. That's why I kind of questioned and stared at him for a second. Yeah, Gary?
I mean, as anybody, because of all these reasons, he realizes it is a daunting task.
Yeah.
And when we look at things in our lives that are daunting tasks, it's not like we don't want to. We just realize how much work it's going to be, and I really want to commit to that.
I think the same thing every time I look at my yard, and I'm like, I know I need to go mow that, but I don't know if I have the wherewithal. Yeah, I think that's probably some truth to that. I mean, at 40 years old, he's willing to undergo something because he's operating from a very privileged position. I think the other half of it is now he's married with 2 kids, and he's thinking to himself, who am I to go back and do something like this when as Sammy talked about, I've got a pretty good life here. And I think that's what it boils down to, and that's why when you look at these excuses, and people have done thousands of sermons and Bible classes on these excuses, and they've looked at it for all these different ways. All of them boil back to one simple point, which is that he just didn't want to go. And I think you can slice that however you want to. But look at the excuses that he has leading up to this. For instance, if you look at Exodus chapter 3, and I know we didn't read verses 7 through 10, but read verse 11, because this is essentially where it comes at. Exodus chapter 3 starting, we'll read verses 10 and 11. Exodus 3 and verse 10. He says, therefore come now, and I will send you to Pharaoh, so that you may bring my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt. This is exactly what you wanted to do 40 years ago. Now I'm helping you with it. Moses says to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt? He doubts himself. Why does he doubt himself? He's not a son of Pharaoh anymore. Now he's a shepherd in Midian. Totally different identity. But why does he doubt himself? Go ahead.
You've been through about 2 generations since he was there.
Right.
Now he's just an old man. He's tired, worn out. He just don't.
I literally did not anticipate coming into this class how many people would talk about how he's an old man and he's tired and wants to sit in his rocking chair. But I can totally agree with that. He's like, look, there are younger men for this job. John, go ahead, and then Chris.
I disagree with Joe. Because,
Well then.
Because when Moses died, it says he was 120 when he died, and his vigor had not decreased.
Yeah, he probably would have lived to 130 if it hadn't been for all the complaining from the Israelites. But yeah, I mean, if he's 80 years old and he's shepherding a flock in Midian in the hill country, he's probably in pretty good shape. So I agree with you. I think that physically he probably can handle it. Emotionally, maybe more where Joe's coming at, where he's just like, this is not my job anymore. And I think probably he's operating from a cynical perspective. I tried this, and they didn't listen to me. And if anything, I'm in a lower status now. So what's really changed in this whole equation? Go ahead.
He's asking, who is he, who's one person to stand against one of the mightiest powers of the
Right.
world at that time?
Yeah.
And bring out an entire population of people with no consequence.
Right. I mean, if you think about the simple logistics of what he was asked to do, and let's say, well, I'm not going to get into that because that could be politics, but let's just say you're asked to incite a rebellion against the government. Where would you even go? Do you just walk up to the White House and knock on the front door? Like, what is the logistics of this? Do I need a meeting with cabinet members? Like, how does this happen? And so you're right. His whole question in verse 10 is, or in verse 11 is, who am I that I should go do this? Any status? God answers this in verse 12 by saying, certainly I'll be with you, and it'll be the sign to you that it is I have sent you, that when you've brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain. Horeb and Sinai, in my opinion, are the same reason or the same mountain because of this verse. This is a fulfillment. We'll talk about this later, but it's a fulfillment of the sign. You're here, or I'm with you because you're leading them out, and you're going to be right here. So whatever happens in between, I'm going to be with you the whole time. So God gives him essentially a stamp. I'm with you. It's not just you going by yourself. Look in verse 13. Moses said to God, behold, I'm going to the sons of Israel, and I will say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. Now they may say to me, what is his name? What an interesting question. What does that tell you about the nation of Israel? They don't know God. Or if they do know God, maybe they're confusing him with the pantheon of gods. Because in the time period that the Israelites have been in Egypt, you're talking about a civilization that has gone from a largely, and I might have gotten this backwards, from a largely polytheistic society to a largely monotheistic society, with all of them funneling towards one deity established through the Pharaoh. So if you are this God, then which God are you? Are you the God of the Hittites? Are you the God of the Amorites? Which God is it? That tells you everything you need to know about the status of these people. What is God's response back to them? Or back to Moses, rather. Who shall I say sent me?
The answer, I am who I am.
I am who I am. What does that mean? Don't bring Popeye into the equation. Yeah. Go ahead, Curtis. I was thinking the same thing.
This is the present tense with the verb to be.
Right.
So he indicates he's eternal because he is and always will be.
Right. He is, he always will be. I am what I am. This is just my station. This is who I am. It also, if you fast forward, I think it's in Deuteronomy when Moses is talking to the people, there's a specific prohibition. We talked about this during our worship class. There's a specific prohibition against encapsulating deity inside an idol. Not because, well, idolatry is wrong, but the problem with that is you can't sum up who God is with the image of a bird or the image of a cow or whatever it is. And so the fact that God doesn't give his name in this passage signifies that he's everything, he's everywhere, he encompasses all things. And so the idea that he says, I am that I am, he's like, I'm not this God, I'm not that God, I just am. And if you have any questions, later. But he essentially doubts the authority of himself at this, the authority of the mission. If I can't go on my own and I can't bring these people out of Egypt and I'm being sent by you, then I need to have some kind of emissary stamp, some kind of authority basis by which I'm bringing this message to these people.
And when God tells Moses, I am who I am,
Mm-hmm.
when Jesus in John, when he, in the book of John,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, they say, well, who do you think you are?
Yeah.
And Jesus says, I am. And
Yeah.
that was just like, you could have hit those Pharisees with a sledgehammer.
Yeah. I mean, heresy doesn't even begin to tap into what Jesus did in that moment, according to the Pharisees, because he equates himself to be God. That's a charge they're going to bring later. But you're right. I mean, the very name of God, especially in this passage, and if you look at Jewish commentaries and the way they interpret this passage, there's a lot of disagreement about exactly what it was that God said here. Whether you're talking about the YHVH synonym or name that they use for God, Jews don't use vowels, and so Yahweh is that way, or Yahweh is the name that they would give to him. But they can't say the name of God because it's so holy. And so oftentimes in Jewish writings, you'll see G-D, that's used for God. So the idea that God says his name, he has the authority to do that, but mankind doesn't. So Jesus was way off the reservation when he said something along those lines. But it's a very potent phrase, regardless of which way you look at it. It's a very powerful phrase that he does. When you look at Exodus chapter 4, not only does He doubts himself. Not only does he doubt authority, then he doubts the people. Look in Exodus chapter 4, starting verse 1. What if they won't believe me or listen to me? What shall I say? For they may say, well, the Lord hasn't appeared to you. And then the Lord gives him 2 miracles. The Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? And he said, a staff. He said, throw it on the ground. So he threw it on the ground and became a serpent. Moses fled from it. But the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand, grasp it by its tail. So he stretched out his hand. He caught it, became a staff in his hand. That they may believe, verse 5, that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. Then verse 6, the second miracle. The Lord furthermore said to him, now put your hand into your bosom. So he put his hand into his bosom, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous like snow. He said, put your hand into your bosom again. So he put his hand into his bosom again. When he took it out of his bosom, behold, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. If they will not believe you or heed the witness of the first sign, they may believe or the witness of the last sign. But if they will not believe even these 2 signs or heed what you say, then you shall take some water from the Nile, pour it on the dry ground, and the water which you take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground. This process is fascinating because it reveals the first sign is to turn the serpent or the staff into a serpent. They don't believe that, you go to leprosy 1. They don't believe that, you go to the water turning into blood. How many of those miracles did Moses do? All of them, to a certain extent. He certainly did the Pharaoh or the staff one, he did the blood one. The one with the leprosy, I don't remember appearing in there, but it certainly appears when you talk about Miriam. There's a mention later when Miriam and Aaron walk up to Moses and they say, what's made you different than the rest of us? And Moses calls out to God to affirm his authority. What happens to Miriam? She gets leprosy, exactly. So if there's any question about who I am, what the message is, who sent me, just look to these signs because they provide the stamp on it. So all of these, I think, are fascinating. He doubts the people. He's right to. If you look in Deuteronomy, Moses, everything that he'd ever said about the people, they're stubborn, they're rebellious, they're pig-headed, all the things, they found themselves to be that. So he's right to be worried about it. Verse 10, though, Moses says to the Lord, please, Lord, I've never been eloquent, nor recently, nor in time past, nor since you have spoken to your servant, for I am slow of speech and I am slow of tongue. The Lord said to him, who has made man's mouth, or who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now then go, and I, even I, will be with your mouth and teach you what you are to say. What is Moses doubting this time? He's doubting, he's doubting his talents. And this is, I think, interesting because he says, I'm slow of speech, I don't have the right words, I'm not eloquent. So if you think that I'm going to convince Moses based on my own words, you picked the wrong guy for that. The fascinating thing about this is all 4 of these, and these are what we mentioned earlier, all 4 of these are things that we struggle with. When you think about why we don't tell people the gospel, why we don't stand up for God, or whether the situation is we don't do his will, we doubt things. We doubt ourselves. We doubt maybe the people that we're going to talk to. We certainly doubt our talents at times. So all of these things factor into very natural reasons why we don't fulfill the commandment of God on a number of different occasions. What's the real reason that he didn't want to go? We talked about this a little bit several minutes ago, whenever that was. What's the real reason he didn't want to go?
Verse 13, he asks, "Can you send somebody else?"
It's really not that complicated, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, he just simply didn't want to do it. And I think when you look at all these other excuses, they're smokescreens. They're just rationalizations. They're avoidances. They're all the things that he is trying to get him out of the simple statement that he just simply doesn't want to go. And what I think is fascinating is how God responds to this. How does God respond to this one in verse 13? Because this is noteworthy, in my opinion. How does God respond to this?
First in anger.
He responds in anger. That's fascinating to me because have you ever seen God be angry with any of these other 4 excuses? These other 4 excuses that Moses brings up, doubting myself and doubting the authority, people, talents. Is God angry about any of those? Go ahead.
When Moses, the second time he brought water out of the rock, he instructed Moses to speak to the rock. Moses chose instead to strike the rock again as he had before. And this showed that his lack of faith, as God, God said, "You are the promised land."
Right. He is mad at Moses then, but think back to these 4 excuses. Does any of these anger God to the extent that verse 13 does? He's long-suffering. I can deal with your excuses. Every excuse you have, I can find a way around it. Every objection you have, I can find a solution. But he doesn't get mad. The text doesn't record him getting mad at Moses until verse 13. Go ahead.
It's kind of, maybe it's questioning God's choice and authority. It's like God's already jumped in.
Yeah. I think he certainly doubts God. I think he's saying, well, you're telling me I can do this and I'm telling you I can't. So there's where the doubt comes in. But how do you handle this? If you ask somebody to do something and they come up with all these excuses, you can talk around that. But how do you handle it when somebody just says, I just don't want to do it? What business owners, and you tell your employee to do something, I guess you could fire them. I guess that's different. But if you tell somebody to do something, they give you all the reasons why they can't, and they just say, I'm not going to do it. What do you do after that?
There's consequences. It's just like raising your children.
Mm-hmm.
You tell your child to do something and they don't do it. You tell your child again to do something and they don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
At a certain point, you tell your child to do something and they flat out refuse.
Right.
Then there's consequences.
There is consequences, and we don't have to go into those consequences, but you're right. There are always consequences to that. That's true, because we're being recorded. That's a smart lady. Go ahead, Dad. Speaking of consequences.
On that same line, what I was going to say is, once you try to negotiate it into the situation and get them to accept it, they don't do it. You pull your authority and just say, you will, as I am.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to take these people. I'm going to send you to Pharaoh.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to send you to my people. I'm going to send you to Pharaoh. He's going to tell those people to get out of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
They can't refuse that. And once he says, I am is doing this,
Mm-hmm.
it's done.
Yeah, there's so many, I think, parallels with this. I mean, there's so many different ways you can go with this statement. Because first of all, if you can talk about how Moses, we talked about him being types earlier, how he's the type of Pharaoh. Pharaoh has all sorts of excuses as to why he's not going to let the people go. That's exactly what Moses does in Exodus chapter 3. He's resisting the will of God as a result of that. You can also ask the what if question. If Moses just says flat out, I'm going to go, well, does Aaron ever enter the equation? Aaron helps Moses in a lot of ways, but Aaron causes quite a few problems for Moses along the way too. And so there's all sorts of consequences around his just stubborn refusal to do something like this. And it goes back to a little bit of what Jesus talks about. He has this parable, I can't remember what chapter it's in, but Jesus has this parable where a father walks up to two sons, he says, go do this. The first person says, I won't, and then he does it. The second one, he says, go do it. He says, I will, and then he doesn't. Which one of them actually did it? It's the one who actually went and did it. So it doesn't matter what you say, how you rationalize it. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters is that you do them. What's fascinating about all of this is that every single one of these issues that Moses is worried about came true. Look in Exodus chapter 6. And this, I think, speaks to the fact that Moses probably knew what he was talking about. I don't think he was just pulling fears from a vacuum. Exodus chapter 6, starting in verse 10. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, go tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the sons of Israel go out of his land. Moses spoke before the Lord, saying, behold, the sons of Israel have not listened to me. How then will Pharaoh listen to me, for I am unskilled in speech? Notice he's still peddling that same old lie. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron and gave them a charge, the sons of Israel, and to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to bring the sons of Israel out of the land of Egypt. So Moses goes reluctantly. He's terrible at speaking. The people don't listen to him. And now he's talking to Pharaoh. So everything that Moses was worried about essentially comes true. The reality is it doesn't matter. When God tells you to do something, you do it. And that's why when you look at this other progression, this is another part that I think is interesting when you look at this. Moses leads off this entire discussion. The burning bush, Moses, oh, here I am. I'm ready to do what you want me to do. I'm willing to take part in it. And then throughout the course of when he's told what to do, he ends up with just send somebody else. I was cool with doing your will until I realized what it entailed. And now I just kind of don't want to do it anymore. So that progression of thought, I think, is interesting. Somebody have any thoughts or comments real quick? Yeah, Cameron?
This feels a lot like, father-son interaction, where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
trying to get your son to learn how to do something, but
Right.
doesn't want to do it. I mean, we do this like with walking. Kid doesn't necessarily want to walk. It's uncomfortable. It's strange. I don't know how to do it. I'm not good at it.
Mm-hmm.
You really need to. And once you start walking and you get good at it, okay, now you're running.
Yeah.
How great you are. So, God's using this situation and saying, look, Moses, I get that you have these doubts about yourself. I get that this is an intimidating task.
Yeah.
But I need you to do this.
Yeah.
Because I need somebody to do this.
Yeah. And as somebody who's about to have a son, I'm sure that is in your mind. Yeah. And you're right. I mean, it's not a question of, or I like what you said. I understand that it's painful and it's hard, But there's no way around it. You're doing it one way or the other. And if you're not, then you're in violation of my commandment. Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, I think in that light, it's interesting to see the actual choices of God's words after he gets angry. You will go.
Yeah.
I will say this. You will tell, Aaron this. And then to see Moses' reaction change. So Moses went. Pretty simple words.
Yeah. Yeah. Once he gets mad and that burning bush glows hotter, you're like, okay, maybe I should listen to this, because whatever's about to happen to me in this moment can't be worse than what's going to happen in Egypt. And yeah, his demeanor changes, and I think that's part of the reason that Moses puts all this in there, is to tell the Israelites, look, I was just as stubborn as you guys were. I was just as hesitant about you guys were, scared just like you guys were. But we work through these things because of our fear and our trust and our reliance on God. I think you can also ask, we'll kind of shoot through these relatively quickly because we've got about 4 minutes left. What is Moses really scared of? And I think if you boil it down to the simplicity of what he's worried about, obviously he's worried about Israel responding, he's worried about Egypt, he's worried about his own capabilities as a leader. All three of these are very valid concerns. Number one, Pharaoh doesn't believe him. And if you look in Exodus chapter 4, starting verse 21, God tells him beforehand that he's not going to believe you. When you go back to Egypt and see that you perform Pharaoh all the wonders in which I have put in your power, but I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. You then shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my son, my firstborn. So I said to you, let my son go that he may serve me, but you have refused to let him go. Behold, I will kill your son, your firstborn. The stakes amp up in a hurry, because God tells Moses, before he even goes to Egypt, he's not only going to reject what I'm telling you, but he's going to reject it to the point that it's going to cost him his firstborn son. Stakes are there. Moses knows that going into it. Look right after that. Maybe Moses sinned. Maybe he's not the best leader he should be. Well, that's obvious, because when you look at Exodus 4:24 now, it came about the lodging place on the way. This is as he's en route to Egypt, that the Lord met him and sought him to put him to death. Then Zipporah took a flint, cut off her son's foreskin, threw it at Moses' feet, and she said to him, you are indeed a bridegroom of blood to me. So he let him alone, and at that time she said, you are a bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision. Problem was, Moses didn't circumcise his own children. So as he's en route to Egypt to let God's people go, who are people of the circumcision, he fails in the first task with his own children. So is he worried that he's going to sin? Probably, but it's okay. There's still grace in there. His wife helped him out in that situation. Maybe he's worried that people won't believe him. Verse 27. The Lord said to Aaron, go to meet Moses in the wilderness. He went and met him at the mountain of God and kissed him. Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord which he had sent him, all the signs that he commanded him to do. Moses and Aaron went and assembled all the elders of the sons of Israel. Aaron spoke all the words which the Lord had spoken to Moses. He then performed the signs in the sight of the people. Those are the ones we talked about earlier. So the people, verse 31, believed. And when they heard that the Lord was concerned about the sons of Israel and that he had seen their affliction, then they bowed low and worshiped. Totally different reaction this time than 40 years earlier. So notice how all these things that Moses was concerned about happened in slightly different ways than he was anticipating. I'm worried the people won't believe me. Well, not only are they going to believe you, but they're ready to leave Egypt. I think all of this shows his fear and how his fears were assuaged. As I mentioned earlier, I think we have a couple minutes left. Moses was a very process-driven person. And so God gives him step-by-step account how you take these people out of Egypt. Number one, you're going to go talk to Israel. You can't lead a rebellion unless the people buy into that whole situation. You're going to specifically talk to the pharaohs, or the elders. You're going to take them to Pharaoh, so that's the next step in this whole equation. Then you're going to anticipate the plagues. The plagues are going to last anywhere between 8 to 14 months, depending on how you interpret these different plagues. So it's going to be a lengthy, proving, cleansing period for Egypt and for this people. And then also you're going to leave with resources. Verses 21 through 22 at the end of Exodus 3 say that you are going to plunder the Egyptians. You're going to leave with silver. You're going to leave with gold. You're going to leave as a victor. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments on this? Yeah, John?
What's interesting to me is that when God is talking to Moses, when Moses gets down to that point where he says, send somebody,
Yeah.
and the anger of the Lord burned against Moses, you would think that God would smack him around or made him a leper or something,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And then when he starts to go back to Egypt with Aaron,
Mm-hmm.
God meets him and is going to put him to death.
Mm-hmm.
Moses to death. You know, over something about he didn't circumcise his boy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's just
It shows the seriousness of the mission, that if you're going to go do this mission, you're going to do it the right way. You're not, if Moses doesn't have his own children circumcised, then what right does he have?
At the first point,
Yeah.
he refuses God. God doesn't kill him or make him anything.
Yeah.
He just says you're going to go.
Yeah.
And then on the way, he's going to kill Moses because he gets circumcised.
Yeah, but at that point, Moses is already going. He's like, all right, if this is the way you want me to do it, then I'm going to do it. But God's saying you have to do it the right way. Yeah, Gary?
And I think these 4 points are just so clearly, when you look at them like this, the foundation of the title of this class. Because God could have just wished this to happen.
Yeah.
But there was a process both for the Israelites and for the Egyptians that had to happen.
Yeah, and that's I think another assumption that we sometimes make about Exodus is that, man, if Pharaoh just let the Israelites go, they would have all left. Well, I don't know about that, because when you look at the Babylonian captivity, that's only 70 years, and most of them don't leave. So it's almost as if, and I don't want to get too far into God's providence because we don't know anything about that, but it's almost as if the plagues had to come to prove who God was to these people, so that when the time came for them to leave, they understood and followed him into the wilderness. Both of those things have to take place in order for this to happen. It's not just these are the people now they're in a different location. It's a creation of these people. Somebody else have any thoughts or comments? Okay, if not, we'll pick up with chapter 5 next week. Thank you, everybody.